Welcome, everyone, to a brand new explainer. Today, we are uncovering an incredibly fascinating breakdown of our body's biomechanics. And this is all based on a really eye-opening presentation by Dr. Christophe DeLong and Conexa Formation. You know, if you think of your knee as sort of the security guard of your leg, well, your hip is the absolute sovereign motor. It's the general giving the orders. It's literally the most powerful joint in the human body, dictating the orientation of your entire lower half. But here is the kicker, and this is wild. Almost everything we've been taught about hip pain, specifically regarding a very famous muscle you've probably tried to stretch 1,000 times, is completely backwards. So get ready, because today we are walking through a massive paradigm shift in how we understand our body's mechanics, alongside some truly brilliant experts. Okay, let's dive into this. Why exactly is your psoas innocent? I mean, if you've ever had a hip, back, or groin pain, or honestly, if you just sit at a desk all day, someone has probably told you that your psoas muscle is too tight and needs to be aggressively stretched. It's the usual suspect in almost every clinical lineup. But we're going to look at the anatomy today like a detective. And what the latest clinical expertise reveals is this really fascinating mystery. The frequently blamed psoas muscle is actually entirely innocent. That's right, 90%. In a staggering 90% of cases, it turns out the psoas is not the true culprit behind your dysfunction. No, it's merely a collateral victim. Think about it. The psoas is the only muscle directly connecting your spine to your legs. So when your deeper hip mechanics fail, your brain absolutely panics. It uses the psoas as a desperate messenger, putting it under extreme tension to try and stabilize a much deeper joint issue. It burns and aches, but not because it's physically too short. It hurts because it's desperately doing the work of other muscles just to protect your vulnerable spine. So there is a massive difference here between an amateur approach and a true expert approach to the human body. The banalized vision, which is what you see all over the internet, focuses on brute force. It just assumes the muscle is physically too short, so the obvious answer is to pull it, right? To stretch it endlessly. But this can actually make things so much worse. The expert vision, on the other hand, understands that the brain is actively protecting the joint. Therefore, the expert focuses on deep joint congruence, which means perfectly centering the head of the femur right inside its socket using posterior co-contraction. In other words, you don't fight the tension. You fix the underlying instability so the brain can finally let that poor psoas relax. To really understand how to achieve that expert centering, we need to look at the hip's sovereign design. The hip is what anatomists call an anarthrosis, a ball and socket joint. Unlike your knee, which is basically just a simple hinge meant to swing back and forth, the hip's mechanical architecture is an absolute masterpiece. It offers this perfect, beautiful compromise between massive weight-bearing stability and dynamic, multidimensional mobility. The head of your femur is a perfect sphere that fits deeply and securely into the acetabulum, the socket of your pelvis. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the secret to that immense stability. It's actually not just bone resting on bone. Surrounding that socket is something called the labrum. Think of it like a fibrocartilage O-ring. This ring acts as a perfect seal, trapping synovial fluid and creating a powerful suction cup effect, literally negative pressure, inside the joint itself. This brilliant hydraulic engineering is exactly what allows the hip to support massive weight, sometimes multiple times your own body weight, without the bones ever painfully grinding together. But of course, the bones and that labrum need a highly intelligent control system to run the show. Enter the muscle triad. Imagine your hip operating like a finely tuned scale. On one side, in the back, you have your gluteus maximus, the absolute powerhouse motor that propels you forward, and your gluteus medius, which is the critical lateral stabilizer that keeps your pelvis beautifully level when you walk. On the other side, in the front, you have the psoas. When your posterior stability from those strong glutes is active, the hip is perfectly centered. But if your glutes literally fall asleep from too much sitting, the scale tips. The brain scrambles, recruits everything it can find in the front, and your poor anterior psoas is forced to overwork, eventually burning out and causing you all that pain. Now, the glutes aren't working alone here. It turns out the true unsung heroes of your hips are actually the deep pelvitrochanteric muscles. Think of them as the hip's Swiss guard. This is a group of tiny, extremely deep rotators wrapping intimately around the joint. They act as millimeter-precise adjusters. Much like the intricate cables in a suspension bridge, they gently pull the head of the femur perfectly into the deepest, safest part of the socket. An expert practitioner knows you don't attack a tight psoas. Instead, you work to gently wake up this Swiss guard, restoring that deep, centered harmony from the inside out. And hey, speaking of cables, we absolutely have to talk about the iliotibial tract, or the IT band. People love to foam roll this thing into oblivion, thinking it's a tight, stubborn muscle. But it's not.
It's actually an energy-storing tension exoskeleton. It's a massive fascial band that acts exactly like the tension cables on a sailboat's mast. When you walk, it dynamically stores and releases energy, allowing you to stand and move with incredible efficiency and minimal muscular effort. It literally transforms bending forces into compression forces, which your leg bones are perfectly designed to handle. And this brilliantly illustrates why all of this precise centering is so incredibly vital. Let's compare a healthy, perfectly centered hip joint with a thick, pristine cartilage interface to a hip suffering from osteoarthritis or coxarthrosis. When the Swiss guard fails, and when those glutes turn off, the head of the femur loses its perfect centering. It starts to drift. That protective hydraulic suction cup is compromised, and suddenly the immense pressure of your body weight starts mercilessly grinding down on a tiny, concentrated point of very vulnerable cartilage. It's really crucial to understand here that osteoarthritis is not just some inevitable passive aging. Not at all. It is an active, systemic failure of the gliding interface. And it happens progressively in 3 distinct phases. First, you have the stress phase, where the cartilage begins to lose its ability to hold water and its youthful elasticity. Then comes the fissuration phase, where actual microcracks form and cellular debris falls directly into the joint space, triggering massive inflammation. Finally, the bone reaction phase, where the naked bone hardens just to survive the sheer pressure, painfully growing bone spurs. To prevent all of this, we have to actively preserve the movement and that deep centering of the joint.
Let's move to and see how this builds into one of the most extreme examples of human movement, the ballet dancer. Think about it. How exactly do dancers perform an arabesque, putting immense, seemingly unnatural pressure on their hips without destroying them entirely? Well, it's because true grace isn't just aesthetic, it's deeply biomechanical. They achieve it through neural prediction. Their brains flawlessly coordinate the Swiss guard and the glutes to center the joint just right, creating a passive spiral locking of the deep ligaments. They rely entirely on fluid, deep posterior stability rather than brute force, absorbing incredible shock without letting the bones ever collide. So the crucial point is summarized beautifully in this quote from Dr. DeLong's materials: "The expert knee never dives, the expert hip never collapses." It's such a profound takeaway. A truly healthy, sovereign hip does not rely on constantly yanking on your psoas muscle. It relies completely on posterior strength from your glutes and precise, millimeter-perfect centering from your deep rotators. It is a story of harmony, neurological prediction, and unwavering stability coming from the back. Which brings us to our final thought for today. The hip is the absolute pivot point for your physical freedom. It's the thing that allows you to stand up proudly, to walk effortlessly, or to just get out of a low car seat without a grimace. Now that you know about the Swiss guard, the incredible suction cup of the labrum, and the total innocence of your psoas, how will you rethink your daily movements? Instead of desperately forcing stretches, will you focus on finding your center and waking up your glutes? Apply this expert mindset to your own body, and you might just unlock a level of mobility you thought was gone forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep moving gracefully.